For someone living in Europe during the early 20th century, they'd probably associate pogroms with Russia, as it had witnessed many during its brutal civil war and from before. But, as history showed, it would be a state in Western Europe that would unleash the worst anti-Semitic violence ever seen. But before the Holocaust was even possible, Germany had to undergo years of propaganda and agitation before that could happen. As anyone with two brain cells to rub together should know, Hitler and his Nazis were rabid anti-Semites. There were two main reasons for this that they used to justify their actions. The first being that they simply saw themselves as being superior, that the so-called Aryan race was the purest of them all. The second, and slightly more interesting, was that they genuinely believed that the Jews were a threat. During the Weimar era, it was simply easier to use the Jews as a scapegoat for Germany's hardship. If you can remember, the Nazis claimed that they were to blame for Germany's defeat in World War I. They also claimed that they were behind communism, conspiring to destroy Germany, and a bunch of other things. While Hitler may have viewed things this way, most Germans viewed things differently, at least in how they perceived the so-called Jewish question. Many people who voted for Hitler didn't even do so because they were anti-Semites, instead focusing on more serious issues such as the ongoing Great Depression, street violence, and the broader instability of the Weimar era. However, once Hitler had seized power, the mood of the public towards the Jews began to change for the worst. The closure of opposition media and broader censorship allowed Hitler to reforge Germany into a new and more brutal society. Propaganda was constantly targeting the Jews. The Hitler Youth was indoctrinating the country's youth into hating them, and anyone who protested was quickly silenced. The first real attack against Germany's Jews came in the form of boycotts on their businesses, and the first of many laws that aimed to exclude them from society. Most infamous of these laws were the ones approved in Nuremberg during 1935. To summarize them, the Nuremberg laws were meant to further segregate German Jews from the rest of the population, rather tame when compared to what's to come. Continuing the trend of applying pressure, the Nazis began a ruthless campaign of kicking the Jews out of economic life called Aryanization that started as early as 1933. It came into full force during early 1938, when half of all Jewish assets had been confiscated and the Jews barred from many economic activities. With the German public becoming increasingly hostile thanks to Nazi propaganda, and the law failing to protect them, it wouldn't take long for violence to occur against Germany's Jewish population. During the first few months of 1935, there were several anti-Jewish demonstrations in cities such as Munich and Berlin. These events were characterized mostly by acts of vandalism against Jewish businesses, though many Jews were assaulted in the streets. Even non-Jews who worked in the targeted stores were sometimes even beaten. The perpetrators of these attacks were your typical suspects: Hitler Youths, Nazi Party members, and SA Brownshirts. The police also noted that many of them were of very questionable nature, which just goes to show what type of company the Nazis kept. Interestingly, the higher-ups within the Nazi Party were opposed to this type of behavior, not because they cared about innocent civilians being lynched, but because it looked bad for their image. In foreign countries, notably the United States, citizens boycotted German goods in protest of their treatment of Jewish civilians. In an incredible display of intelligence, Hitler blamed the Jews for the consequences of his own actions. With conditions worsening, tens of thousands would emigrate, totaling about 163,000. However, this was only a portion of the total Jewish population of the Third Reich. That same year, it was recorded that 360,000 Jews remained, having grown due to the expansion of German territory. With racial tensions in Germany at an all-time high, it would only take a single spark to ignite what was essentially a powder keg of hatred. During March 1938, the Polish government issued a decree that took away citizenship from thousands of Poles living in foreign countries, notably the 50,000 Polish Jews living in Germany, in a desperate attempt to prevent Jews living in annexed Austria from seeking refuge in their country. During this period, Poland itself was rife with anti-Semitism, though arguably not on the same level as the Nazis. Regardless, the Poles were adamant on not letting in any more Jews into their country. This was a problem for Hitler because, as mentioned, there were 50,000 Polish Jews that were basically trapped in Germany. The already bad relations between Germany and Poland became even worse as negotiations between the two parties led nowhere. Later, in October, the Polish government issued another decree that would cancel Polish passports if they did not obtain a special authorization for entry into Poland by the end of that month. All this did was further difficulties for thousands of Polish Jews living in Germany. The unfortunate souls were basically trapped between two anti-Semitic states that wanted them gone. On the 27th of October, German police initiated what they called the Poland Action for the deportation of Polish Jews from German territory. During the following days, the Nazis rounded up 18,000 Jews and loaded them onto trains headed for the Polish border under the watchful eye of armed guards. They were taken without warning. When they arrived, they were forced out and, in many cases, beaten. Since the Polish authorities had closed the border, the Jews were basically stuck in a no-man's land between the two sides. The conditions that they were forced to stay in were pitiful, having no shelter against the rain and little to eat. Most of them eventually crossed the Polish border, but were temporarily interned in a concentration camp near Zawacyn. On the 29th of October, German police softened their campaign after the Polish government threatened to deport Germans living in Poland. An agreement was reached that allowed the Polish Jews to return to Germany to retrieve their belongings before definitively moving to Poland. Of the thousands of victims claimed by the Poland Action were the Grinspans from Hanover. Their 17-year-old son, Herschel, was at the time illegally living in Paris, France. On the 3rd of November, he was finally brought to light on the events that transpired between the 27th and the 29th of the previous month in a letter written to him by his sister. She told him that all she could manage to bring were a few essential clothes, and that they were basically penniless. In a letter to his uncle, Herschel wrote, "My heart bleeds when I think of our tragedy and that of 12,000 Jews. I have to protest in a way that the whole world hears my protest, and this I intend to do. I beg for your forgiveness." After acquiring a gun, Herschel headed to the German embassy, where, upon coming face to face with the German diplomat Ernst von Rath, shot him, putting the man in critical condition before being apprehended by the French police. Herschel's motives for his attempt on von Rath's life was for revenge and justice for the crimes the Nazis committed against his people. His protest was heard all too well, but instead of rallying support against the Nazis, he gave Hitler a justification to rally his own supporters against Germany's remaining Jews. Coincidentally, this all happened during the anniversary of Hitler's beer hall putsch of 1923, which surely contributed to rallying up the Nazis. Upon hearing the news of the attempt, Hitler contemplated possible reprisals, such as forcing the Jews to pay tribute. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels was quick to act, lest an excellent propagandistic opportunity be wasted. That same day, he gave the press orders to focus on the attempt, to portray it as an attack by international Jewry against the Reich, and that its perpetrators would suffer the direst of consequences. Goebbels then gave his subordinates in the city of Hesse orders to launch attacks against the Jewish community to experiment if a broader pogrom was feasible. The Nazi press immediately got to work in fanning the flames, making references to a previous attempt on another German diplomat named Wilhelm Gustloff back in 1936. Before the Nazis could fully mobilize, their supporters began holding anti-Jewish demonstrations all over the country. Between the 7th and the 8th of November, synagogues had been sacked and even destroyed in places such as Rothenburg and Bad Hersfeld, while authorities did nothing to stop the violence. The SD reported that during those days, Jewish shops and houses had their windows smashed, and that in Bebra, several Jewish apartments had been destroyed. The SA, SS, and the Gestapo were soon convinced to join in on the violence, happily setting alight property belonging to the Jewish community, all the while the press tried to convince readers that this was all just a spontaneous act of fury by the German people. Interestingly, Hitler, as well as other high-ranking Nazis, strayed away from directly talking about the attempt on von Rath. During his speech in Munich commemorating the beer hall putsch, Hitler made no mention of current events. But we know for a fact that he was involved in the initiation and management of anti-Semitic violence thanks to the publication of Goebbels' diaries. Both men had discussed events and had clearly decided to act, though probably deciding to wait for von Rath to die. When, during the last hours of the 9th, while at dinner, Hitler was informed of von Rath's death, he immediately discussed with Goebbels on what to do next. Goebbels was given instructions to further attacks against the Jews, this time with much better coordination. It was also stated that as many Jewish men as possible were to be arrested and interned in concentration camps. A pogrom presented an excellent opportunity for the Nazis to finally push them out of Germany once and for all. Hitler left the assembly early, leaving Goebbels behind to address the attendees. He told them that the Führer had decided that such demonstrations should not be prepared or organized by the party, but insofar as they erupted spontaneously, they were not to be hampered. But as mentioned, these demonstrations were far from spontaneous. After Hitler retired for the night, at 10 p.m., Goebbels went on radio and made all sorts of anti-Semitic threats, demanding revenge against the Jews. The officials present that night interpreted Goebbels' previous address as instructions to not make the party's involvement apparent and relayed orders via telephone to their subordinates. The SA and other Nazi supporters then initiated their own attacks against the Jews, burning and ransacking their property, ranging from synagogues to houses. Hitler then met with Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, at a gathering of SS recruits during midnight. The two men spoke briefly about the ongoing pogrom, though it's not clear what exactly they said. Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, acting under orders from Hitler, gave police commanders all over Germany a formal order to arrest between 20,000 and 30,000 Jews, that the destruction of Jewish property should continue uninterrupted, but that actions should be taken to prevent looting. Reinhard Heydrich, the head of the SD, also gave out orders to his men that echoed those of Müller, except he added that foreign Jews were to be left alone, and that measures be taken to prevent the damaging of German property. From his hotel window in Munich, Goebbels could see the night sky alight in a bright red from the burning synagogues across the city. In his diary, he wrote, "The synagogues burn. We extinguish only insofar as necessary for the neighboring buildings. Otherwise, should burn down. From all over the Reich, information is now flowing in. 50, then 70 synagogues are burning. The Führer has ordered that 20 to 30,000 Jews should immediately be arrested. In Berlin, 5, then 15 synagogues burned down. Now popular anger rages. It should be given free rein." Meanwhile, on the ground, what the Jewish population of Germany experienced that night was akin to a living nightmare. To cite a few examples, in the city of Cologne, groups of Nazis roamed the streets searching for potential victims. When entering a Jewish apartment, they either ordered the occupants to leave or forced them to watch as they threw whatever they could out the windows into the streets and breaking what was left. In the city of Leipzig, the American consul witnessed what he described as insatiably sadistic Nazis forcing local Jews, including women and children, into a shallow stream, forcing the horrified onlookers to spit and throw mud at them. Anyone who showed sympathy were intimidated and couldn't do anything but leave. In Esslingen, SA brownshirts dressed as civilians wielding hatchets attacked the local Jewish orphanage at midnight. They began destroying whatever they could and threw what remained of the orphanage's belongings into a fire they had lit outside. They then told the horrified children that if they didn't leave immediately, they would burn them as well. In Dresden, SS troops had attacked the historic Semper synagogue, filling its interior with gasoline as to set it alight. Once on fire, the local fire department dispatched men to put out the flames, but were stopped by the SS, who only let them contain it as to protect neighboring buildings. There were isolated instances where the police warned Jews of the ongoing pogrom, giving them valuable time to hide. Individual acts of kindness like these had potentially saved dozens of lives, though, tragically, they were quite rare, as many were too scared to help. All over the country, SA brownshirts, SS, Hitler Youths, and other Nazi supporters wreaked havoc in Jewish neighborhoods. Many of these perpetrators were drunk and could care less about the prohibition on looting. So many windows had been shattered from Jewish shops that whole sidewalks were covered in broken glass. The people of Berlin dubbed the pogrom during the night of November 9th to November 10th as Kristallnacht, translated to English as Night of Broken Glass. During the morning of the 10th, the police were finally allowed to restore order, only as to prevent further looting, but it didn't really matter as the damage had already been done. When the dust settled, 7,500 Jewish shops had been destroyed. The damage caused by fires was calculated at 39 million Reichsmarks, broken windows at 6.5 million, and stolen goods at 3.5 million. 30,000 Jews had been arrested by the SS during the pogrom and in the days after. They were subsequently taken to various concentration camps such as Sachsenhausen and Buchenwald, though they would eventually be released. But even then, the short time they spent there was terrifying. Upon reaching the camps via trains, the prisoners were then unloaded, all the while being insulted and kicked. In many cases, they had to wait long instances before they were stripped of their belongings, forced to wear striped uniforms, and had their heads shaven. On November 11th, Reinhard Heydrich reported that 36 Jews had been killed and the same number injured. But this was an understatement. The truth is that 91 Jews had been murdered and hundreds of more took their own lives after losing everything or died because of mistreatment in the camps. To add insult to injury, Hermann Göring, acting on orders from Hitler, issued a decree on the 12th ordering that Germany's Jewish population was to pay a fine of 1 billion Reichsmarks for the damages that the Nazis themselves had inflicted during the pogrom. Things didn't end there, however, as the Jews were also excluded from broader German economic life, and Jewish children were kicked out of school, being segregated from non-Jewish kids. Many cities even established so-called Jew bans, which forbade them from entering places such as museums, theaters, and even residential areas. Many of them took it upon themselves to leave Germany, which, in hindsight, probably saved them from the gas chambers. Contrary to what someone like Goebbels probably believed, Kristallnacht wasn't the expression of popular rage, but more the doing of a much smaller group. According to an SD report, the overall reaction of the public to the events of the 9th and the 10th was that of indignation. While many Germans may not have been sympathetic towards the Jews, they disapproved of this type of uncivilized street violence. The general mood eventually improved when people were assured that all damages were to be paid for by the Jews. Open criticism of the pogrom was almost unheard of. The churches stayed mostly silent, only ever showing concern for Jews who had converted to Christianity. Even if they wanted to condemn the violence, it's not like the Nazis would tolerate dissent. Despite that, many people still felt genuine disgust at the pogrom. According to a report from Social Democrat agents, the public reaction to the pogrom was out of horror. As Goebbels noted in his diary, the reactions of the foreign press was extremely negative. However, the reactions of foreign governments were much more passive, keeping quiet on the issue for various reasons. Britain, for one, restricted Jewish immigration to Palestine in fear of the growing sympathies towards Germany and the Arab world. The US was also reluctant to accept any more Jewish refugees. The case of the passenger ship St. Louis comes to mind, having sailed all the way to Cuba in hopes that the Americans would admit its passengers, which they didn't, instead forcing them to sail back to Europe. Luckily though, they were admitted into France, Belgium, and England, though even they were, to an extent, reluctant. As for France, she was the only major democratic country that didn't even offer a symbolic gesture of condemnation towards the pogrom. Meanwhile in Paris, Herschel Grinspan was in custody awaiting trial for his assassination of von Rath. Herschel received support from an international committee to help pay for his defense. However, he was never brought to trial as Germany invaded France before that could happen. The Vichy government then handed him over to the Nazis, suffering an unknown fate. There is, however, a theory that states that he survived the war. The chief evidence for this is a photograph that dates back to 1946 that shows a man that may or may not be him. As seen, Hitler kept this distance between himself and Kristallnacht. Instead, people like Goebbels and Göring were more public in their participation. But this begs the question, why? We all know Hitler didn't shy away from verbally attacking the Jews and blaming them for Germany's problems, so why would he have an issue with associating himself with Kristallnacht? There are potentially two main reasons why. The first is that he was concerned with the opinions of the German public. As observed, German society didn't unanimously rally behind the Nazis. While open criticism was rare, I'm more than certain that many people were willing to share their true opinions privately. Even if they disliked the Jews, the violence that comes with pogroms is surely something that supposedly civilized people are above. Throwing insults at Jews was simply much more pleasant than throwing punches. Many parallels can also be drawn between the violence of Kristallnacht and the street brawls of the Weimar era. As mentioned at the start of the video, people rallied behind the Nazis in hopes that they would reinstate law and order. Perhaps Kristallnacht ran the risk of convincing them otherwise. The second reason is that Kristallnacht was a major escalation against the Jews. Prior to the pogrom, the Nazis had focused on segregating them from the rest of society. While the Nuremberg laws can be seen as a step towards their further exclusion, Kristallnacht can be seen as a step towards the physical annihilation of the Jews in Europe. It brought forth the destruction of their homes, businesses, places of worship, and even the lives of dozens of people. Arguably, it was the beginning of the Holocaust. If you made it this far in the video, then thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, then consider subscribing. You can also donate to my Ko-fi page if you'd like. Anyways, take care, and have a good day.